People and behaviours, this is another sort of key area. Keep them on all the time. Change is hard. I don't think anybody would argue that change is not hard. Misunderstandings and hierarchy, I'll put those together. Quite often in large multinational companies, the people who are going to write the cheque aren't necessarily people who understand supply chain. So these people, you don't want to go into the checkbook holder's office and start talking about red zones, yellow zones, buffers, DLTs and DD stuff. Don't talk about that. Talk about the ROI. Get them on board with what you want to deliver back to the business. So be aware that though, they may not understand how today's supply chain works, so you can't even go in and start beating up MRP to get to DDMRP if they don't understand how MRP worked, because they've never really been in the detail of the supply chain. These guys are leaders in supply chain. So keep that in mind. Change is hard, and understanding whether people have made the change is critically important. So therefore, visibility and measurement of whether we are doing what we're supposed to do is vitally important. When you start to change a supply chain set of behaviours from firefighting, which the traditional MRP is all about firefighting, always about expediting, it's always about alerts, it's always about chasing. Plans are rarely fixed, even though you have a fixed horizon, plans within that horizon rarely stay fixed because stuff moves around, and we know that stock is not buffering for the noise in your traditional methods. When your organisation has got people who have worked in it for 10, 20, 25 years, believe me, there are some very, very deeply held views about how supply chain works and the behaviours that are needed to survive in today's supply chain. When you go in and you start saying, we're not going to start racing around with fire trucks now, which we often do in projects, we make faster fire trucks, we're actually going to start preventing fires. Because in DD, you're going to prevent fires. You're going to start putting strategic buffers in, and they are going to buffer the noise in the supply chain. You're going to reduce the level of noise, and this is very real and very measurable. Then sometimes the people in key positions in plants, in logistics, in warehouses, you can often threaten them because you're actually undoing some of their reason to exist, some of their hero status, some of their firefight status. Don't underestimate that, because some of the behaviours that you want to see changed in an organisation are actually rooted in some very, very deep places. So you must understand what is motivating somebody. Indeed, in demand-driven, if the demand-driven replenishment signal that you're going to send to a plant says, based on the MOQ that you've agreed, make one batch, don't be surprised if you find 5 batches get made. Why? Well, because the guy making the decision at the plant, not in planning, but in the manufacturing department, in the blending department, he's been driven by 20 years of experience that says the planners never know what they need. I know they asked for 1, I'm going to make 1, they're going to ask me for another 1 the next day, I'll make 5. This happens. I won't sort of name the locations and the plants, but this happens in real supply chains. So be aware of that. It's critical. And obviously, I tried to make a really good graphic for old habits die hard. I only got as far as the die hard bit. Couldn't find an old habit picture. So there's a lot around people and behaviours. Change management is really critical. Really, really critical. I think in some of the case studies that you'll hear, I think you've heard already today that change management is a critical element of how to do this. It's always better to think about it up front and not afterwards in terms of when a project hasn't delivered. So change agents. If you realise that behaviour needs to change and people need to lead that, you do need to have some people who are prepared to stand at the front and lead the change. That can come from various places in the organisation, but you do need to know you can't do this by yourself. You do need to create coalitions, you do need to get leadership support, sponsorship. So there's a number of different communications and influences that you need to make. Having a proper structure around how to do that, what messages should you use, how should you construct them, what's the frequency of them, how should we do the education. There's a methodology around all of that to guide through that. You can't just sneak this stuff in. You can't just say to the planners, can you change the planning rule that you use and go DD, and just expect the rest of the supply chain to deliver the benefits. It simply doesn't work. So you need to think about the whole piece, the whole paradigm shift, the transformational shift, and think holistically. It's not just about planning. It will impact logistics, it will impact production, and it will impact procurement. And so if you don't think holistically about the change management and conversations with those functions, you're being a bit like the old world of that silo functional stuff that I mentioned in the beginning, but honestly, the demand-driven transformation won't be as successful. So think about all of the people and all of the coalitions and all of the stakeholders that you need in that sense. Incrementalism, that was the actual title of my presentation last year, that incrementalism isn't enough. We've got 10, 20 years of incremental projects. This one's not incremental. This is a wholesale change in the way that your supply chain operates, and you need to treat it as such. And then finally, persistence. It doesn't happen overnight. It may take a number of months. In Shell, it took me probably 12 to 18 months from concept ideation to business case approval, so the signing of the check. Probably took me 18 months. I did 3 simulations in that time, and I had done some software evaluation in that time, but I couldn't actually start spending real money activating the project until 18 months. But if you do all of the work up front properly, the actual implementation then goes at quite a speed. So just to give you what do I mean with that, the first implementation in Shell was in October 2 years ago. So October of 2017, and that was in Tarragona in Spain, and we went live with a proof of concept. First go live was the Mediterranean cluster. So Spanish plant, all of the materials and the vertical part of the Spanish plant, and the horizontal network across Spain, Italy and Turkey. So the distribution across what was called that Med cluster. That was in October 2017. 2 years later, wind forwards, 30 plants are live, 134 depots are live, and there's only China left to do. In 24 months, the 95% of the volume of that supply chain is now operating vertically and horizontally with a demand-driven approach, because some of these things were done, correctly up front. How many slides did I jump there? Was that 2 slides? Okay. So just a couple of words on the change management. If you follow the social media channels and you see Carol and Chad's, Twitter posts and LinkedIn posts, you may be forgiven for thinking that if you read the book and you go on a DDP course, you're set, you're done. That's all you need to do. Hopefully you get a sense from what I've described about the kind of complexity you hit in terms of IT, process, culture, behaviour and so on, that there's a bunch of stuff underneath the water on the iceberg, which is where the real change management happens. If it was as easy as just doing DDP, the world would be converted. The whole world would be demand-driven right now, but it's not. There's a bunch of stuff to do in there. Beware of the shortcuts. As I mentioned, it's not just changing your planning engine. It's not just changing MRP for net flow here. It's not like just changing the wheel. There's a significant amount of stuff you need to get right to make the change stick, to make it deliver the benefits that you want it to deliver. Beware of shortcuts. I put that at the top of the stack here. Beware of shortcuts. I've been guilty of this in some previous projects where you don't take the management of change as thoroughly and as seriously as you should. And in pretty much every case that I can remember, you always go back afterwards to do the bit you chose to shortcut in the beginning. So if you didn't do the comms, or you didn't do enough stuff in the beginning of the project because you thought you'd just crack on with the IT part, because the IT bit's the sexy bit, and you forget to do the comms, you forget to do the process design, you forget to do the user training, you forget to do various other things, guarantee you ultimately will go back and do them. And typically you go back and do them because your project is not delivering, or you go back on a refresh of the project or a relaunch of the project. Think of how many times companies have relaunched S&OP, have relaunched other things like in this space. They're all incremental projects, but the principle remains the same. If you don't do some of the fundamental elements of program change properly, you'll just pay later. You'll come back and do them later, if you're to be successful. Nearly done. Timescales and scope. When you're looking at a global change for a multinational, for a large supply chain operating in many countries across many continents, if you're selling the big picture, the big ROI, the 100, 200, 300 million dollar benefit case, because they are of that kind of magnitude, you can clear a lot of pathway with that kind of number. If you take the typical benefits that you hear of demand-driven transformations of 20, 30, 40, 50% inventory reduction, and then add the P&L type reductions that come along with that, so the OPEX cuts, the freight, logistics, transport, the write-offs, the obsoletes, all those other things that come with that, you get to some fairly staggering numbers at the global level. So when you dangle that big carrot in front of your CEO, CFO, whoever it might be, I mentioned planning earlier. Think about how you're going to get there. Think about the path to get there. The path may be difficult. You've got some classic things around cost, effort, and risk. You know, how quickly does your CEO want the benefits? If you dangle a $300 million carrot in front of your VP, your EVP, your CEO, whoever is hierarchically the guy that you need to dangle it in front of, you can be pretty sure he's going to want and expect those benefits tomorrow. Yeah, it's just the way they are. They like to put a bit of stress in the organisation. But when you're looking at a global transformation, and we in Shell we probably took, I worked with the SmartChain guys on this for probably about 6 weeks, working out in detail what happens if we go big bang then. Let's like switch everybody on all on the same Monday. You've got to logically go through that exercise to work out. How about let's do everybody at the same time. Let's create 3 regional teams at the same time. Have we got enough global resource? Have we got enough external resource? Can the software vendor handle that? Do we go slightly staggered? So this is not all of the permutations that we looked at. But we analysed these for cost, effectiveness, sustainability, risk factor, so all of the things that we had. And we came up with a particular way of doing this. I'm not saying which one is right, because in different companies it may be different. But understanding how might you go from a simulation to a proof of concept, so I think me doing it in the Med was the first proof of concept, using a real globally designed system. But how do I then go to the rest of Europe and go to America and go to Asia? You've got to really think that through. It's complex. Of course it's complex. The bigger the company, the bigger the supply chain that you're looking at, the more complex those permutations of how to make that happen is going to play out.